Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our presentation today on the North Columbia Golf Course and Park BMPs project. I'm Alicia Beattie, Capital Projects and Stewardship Specialist with the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization. And with me here today is Erin Hunker, Project Manager, and Lisa Breu, Water Resources Engineer, and they are both with SRF Consulting. I'm going to start with a background on the MWMO and the city of Minneapolis. The Mississippi Watershed Management Organization works to protect and improve water quality, habitat, and natural resources in an urban watershed that drains directly into the Mississippi River. We are a joint powers local government unit and one of approximately 36 watershed organizations in the Twin Cities metro area. Our member communities include Columbia Heights, Fridley, Hilltop, Lauderdale, Minneapolis, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, St. Anthony Village, and St. Paul. The MWMO encompasses about 40 square miles of fully developed lands and waters, and we partner with our members on a variety of stormwater management and habitat improvement projects. Minneapolis makes up about 73% of the area within the MWMO and is a built out urban area with an aging storm sewer system in the process of being updated. Coming into the One Northeast watershed, or 1NE watershed within the MWMO, it's a pretty typical watershed in the urban core in terms of its mixed use land portion, residential with commercial and some industrial corridors. It's unique in that there's a lot of green space and open corridors, parks, golf course, and rail yard. And large portions of the 1NE watershed are Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board land. This effort started as a pilot project for the MWMO. Why the 1NE watershed? There are a lot of big picture motivators for the MWMO to focus here and start up the project. Lots of flooding, it's been an issue and an area of study for the city of Minneapolis for years. And the watershed includes Columbia Golf Course and Park, which includes a multi-use athletic field. Most of the watershed drains directly to the Mississippi River with no water quality treatment. The MWMO City and Park Board formed a partnership to collaborate and focus on solutions for identified issues in the 1NE watershed. Each organization provided a list of goals, and for the purposes of this work, agreed to focus on the areas that overlap. The unique organizational goals were layered into secondary considerations as the project moved forward. Key goals included improving stormwater management, increasing flood resilience, reducing pollutant loading to the Mississippi River, improving ecological function, and improving playability of the golf course and park use. I will turn it over to Erin Hunker.
Thanks, Alicia. So I'm Erin Hunker with SRF and have been the project manager on this project since it started back in 2017. So this slide is really just a high-level timeline of the project from the initial planning study through final design and construction. So the initial One Northeast MOU was signed by the city, the MWMO, and the park board back in the spring of 2017. And that was when our team of SRF, Applied Ecological Services, and Brown Intertech started on the planning and preliminary design portion of the project at that time. That was about a year-long process, so that work was completed in the spring of 2018, and then there was about a year from there that the different partners did some planning and submitted a grant application, which was the MWMO received a grant for the project. So then in spring 2019 is when final design started. Design went through the fall. We had community engagement with neighborhood groups and the golf community, and had a public open house during that time just to let people know what the project entailed. In the spring of 2020, spring of 2021, design was mostly complete. I have my dates all screwed up. 2020, design was mostly complete, and the cooperative agreement was approved for construction and maintenance of the project. We started construction in the fall of 2020, and it was substantially complete this fall. There will be additional work completed a year from now. There's a couple storm sewer inlets that will be brought online, which City of Minneapolis crews will connect. And then the contractor's vegetation maintenance contract goes through the fall of 2023. So it's a multi-year project. So even prior to the planning study, the MWMO and the city of Minneapolis had partnered to develop watershed-wide XP swim and P8 models to better define the issue areas. Modeling confirmed that there are several significant flood inundation areas in the watershed, which are shown in these blue blobs. The key issues are undersized conveyance. The storm sewer trunk is too small for the water that drains to it, and an overall lack of storage within the watershed. So stormwater runoff basically sits in the low areas up within the watershed and floods those areas until it can drain downstream when the storm sewer systems have capacity. A lot of stormwater runoff actually overflows into the golf course uncontrolled, and the golf course does not have a defined outlet. There is a lift station that drains the golf course area. This results in water sitting in the course for 3 to 5 days, which has resulted in the course being closed, or even just carts not being able to be used because there's wet areas, which results in loss of revenue for the park board. Additionally, over 600 acres drain directly to the Mississippi River with no water quality treatment, which is a main focus of the MWMO, and has been a very important goal as the project started and has continued. Lastly, there are natural resource corridors within the watershed that the MWMO wants to protect, extend, and enhance, with the goal of creating an overall connection to the Mississippi River, as shown in the green area in the figure. Additional motivators for this watershed is that the MWMO has 10 years of monitoring data, which includes both flow monitoring data and water quality data, and even completed calibration of both the XP swim and the P8 models. So we have really good data to work with. Also, the city of Minneapolis has street funding and lots of reconstruction work to be done. And as streets are reconstructed, that opens up the ground and gives us access to the storm sewer. And lastly, the park board has also been doing master planning over the past couple of years and looking at their improvements over the next 5 to 20 years. So we're able to use their planning process to incorporate improvement at the Columbia Golf Course and Park that then went through a community engagement process. And then this master plan that showed these features was approved by the Park Board Commission. So the scope of our initial project was really to conduct a planning and preliminary design for solutions within the watershed. The project started very broad. We held a stormwater workshop with multiple different staff members from the different partners and local agencies, and basically had a brainstorm session. This process led to 29 potential projects within the watershed. And at that time, we did a qualitative assessment of what might be achievable in the next 3 to 5 years, and really narrowed in on focusing upstream of the golf course and improvements in the east and north neighborhoods. Still focusing on the 3 key goals of water quality improvement, flood improvement, and ecological improvement. So again, the project included these 3 partners with overlapping goals, and then they each had their own agency-specific goals. The MWMO had laid out a pretty detailed process at the beginning of this project, and basically our task was determine how best to implement this process, with the key goal of getting all partners on board with which projects to move forward. And in order to do that, they needed to have a really good understanding of the results. So the project started really broad. We wanted to put everything out on the table with the mindset that no idea was a bad idea. And then we narrowed it down ultimately to one scenario that included multiple projects with the goal to implement in the next 3 to 5 years. So this led to the final design of 3 major projects located on city and park board property. So this is a map that shows the 3 main project areas. This was located within the preferred scenario. So the projects include storm sewer improvements in infrastructure to improve the conveyance, green infrastructure in city right-of-way, and storage and infiltration within the golf course and park. We're also able to create those habitat connections with native plantings and ecological restoration. So the Hoyer Heights project is located up in the northeastern portion of the watershed. This included tree trenches for water quality treatment, and construction was completed last fall. Here's an image of a tree trench with some rain garden plantings as well that's located in residential boulevards in this neighborhood. The 35th Avenue and Tyler Street Northeast project is shown here in the middle. This was mainly a storm sewer improvement project. So this street was identified for concrete rehab, and we were able to remove do additional work within the street to make the storm sewer bigger in some areas, and even just even it out so that the hydraulic grade line works better. And this was really solved some significant urban flooding issues near this area. This portion of the project also included a large pre-treatment structure to remove sediment and floatables. Construction on this was completed this summer, and this will eventually connect into the Columbia Golf Course project. So the Columbia Golf Course project, which is shown in green, big green area, this included new storm sewer within the golf course, an expanded wet pond, a dry basin, and a large infiltration basin. And we'll spend the rest of the presentation talking more about this project. And this project is substantially complete this fall. So this image shows the over 813 acres that are draining to the Columbia Golf Course project, the majority of which is currently receiving no water quality treatment. There are inlets from city storm sewer on the east side of the golf course and on the northwest side of the golf course. And basically the blue and the orange are the areas that haven't been treated. So this will pass through the proposed BMPs and will result in a significant amount of water quality treatment. I'm going to hand it to Lisa, who will talk more through the design process.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Breu, Water Resources Engineer and the lead stormwater designer for this project. This phase of the project included 3 partners and owners: MWMO, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, the City of Minneapolis, and then 5 design consultants: SRF, Norby Golf Course Architects, Applied Ecological Services, CNA for tunnel design, and Braun Intertech for geotechnical evaluation and potential soil contamination. We connected to a newly upsized 35th Avenue storm sewer trunk coming out of the upstream neighborhood on the east side. A 60-inch reinforced concrete pipe diverts much of that water down to 2 42-inch steel encased plastic pipes that were tunneled under the railroad and then to a dry basin. There is backflow from the dry basin to an enlarged wet pond that previously had no outlet. This was a major area of flooding within the golf course, which will be relieved by the additional storage and new outlet. Beyond the multi-use field, which still allows for some practice area, a 60-inch reinforced concrete pipe that has been rerouted several times in order to save trees and avoid utilities takes water to a large infiltration basin. This basin will also connect to the neighborhood in the northwest and another enlarged trunk line in the future. There are also many pockets of habitat enhancement shown in brown to connect and enhance those wildlife corridors to the river. The green areas show the extensive golf course redesign that was needed to incorporate both the habitat conversion and our BMPs. Overall, we'll have 19 acres of native planting and restoration, including invasive species removal, habitat restoration, native plantings within the BMPs, and a buffer around the wet pond. We employed the use of our landscape architects to give us a sense of scale. The top section is our wet pond and what we wanted to have for a buffer around it. The bottom section is our infiltration basin, which is also shown on the right. It looks quite huge from above, but still fits within the context of the golf course and sense of scale that the golf course architect and landscape architects were looking for. Our golf course coordination was quite extensive. We had conversations early on with Minneapolis Park and Rec Board golf course staff, but didn't bring in the golf course architect until after 30% design. This resulted in some late infiltration basin shifts and pond buffer updates. Restoration areas shifted multiple times to be able to maintain sight lines for golf. We had a lot of scribbling and drawing and arguing back and forth about what made sense and met everyone's goals. Something else that was important was coming up with definitions that we all understood, understanding various types and heights of grasses. Really, in the end, we needed to get in the room together and negotiate areas and understand everyone's viewpoints to make important compromises without compromising any project goals. Ownership and maintenance responsibilities had to be determined during the design to decide who had the final say or needed to come to the table for design decisions that were often more goal-oriented than technical requirement-based, but also to determine which partners would be responsible for construction costs and to form the partnership agreement. The city is responsible for gray infrastructure, most of the storm sewer pipe, except for some small runs of pipe that only take on golf course drainage. The BMPs are going to be maintained by MWMO for 2 years, and then afterwards, the city will take on the water quality portions of the BMP, and the park board will take on upper portions. This is determined by changes in vegetation and ultimately an elevation. The park board will take on the entire wet pond since that only receives backflow and golf drainage. Design changes required not only updates to our plans and cost estimates, but also partnership agreement figures and language. I'll hand it back to Erin, who will walk through some of the issues we ran into during construction in the next few slides.
So as I mentioned earlier, construction started last fall. The MWMO has been documenting construction with drone aerial imagery throughout the process, which has been really great. So these pictures were taken last fall and show the infiltration basin on the left and the expanded wet pond and multi-use basin on the right. So I'm going to walk through a couple of the bigger construction components and some challenges that we experienced working in an urban setting that was developed in the first half of the 20th century. So the large urban drainage area that contributes to the BMPs will contain trash and floatables and debris, and we needed to incorporate pre-treatment before the runoff enters the golf course. The city of Minneapolis will ultimately be responsible for maintaining the pre-treatment systems, and they already have several types of pre-treatment installed throughout the city. So it was really important for us to meet with their maintenance staff early in the design to get their feedback and have a couple of brainstorm sessions on what works and what doesn't from a performance and maintenance perspective. Because these are really key to the success of this whole project, having this pre-treatment system work so that the BMPs don't get clogged with sediment and these other floatable items, both from functionality and from an aesthetic perspective. So through this process, we landed on using CDS units to remove the floatables and sediments. The project included installation of one of these units within the 35th Avenue Northeast project, which is shown in this aerial photo. So these units have a bypass structure and then the CDS units, and these are about 20 to 25 feet deep. So construction and access in this tight residential area were really important. This is just a picture that shows what the unit itself looks like. There were also 2 units installed in the northwest corner of the project area shown on this image in the upper right. And these are just upstream of the infiltration basin. So they are to capture water from the city storm sewer system before it's diverted into the infiltration basin. There has also been a unit installed up on the north side of the golf course near Central Avenue and the railroad crossing. And the goal is to install additional units in the upstream watershed as street reconstruction projects occur. Because one thing we heard from city staff is the more of these that are in almost in line with each other, the more you can capture in smaller units, the better all of your units function. Another key component to this project included tunneling of 2 42-inch DPE pipes encased in 48-inch steel casings beneath the CP railroad. The first pipe was installed without any issues, and that is what is shown in these images here. But the second pipe encountered a tree located in parallel with the pipe with about 20 feet left to go. So we'd already made it through the railroad embankment, only had about 20 more feet, and the pipe basically, they couldn't push it through. So they kept trying. It ended up in some schedule delays. They ended up having to switch machines to dead push the pipe the rest of the way. So this resulted in some additional time spent on the tunneling, but we had included an allowance for tunnel and obstruction, which did cover the additional cost. And the other pretty cool thing is that the inverts were only off by a few hundredths, even though they had run into this obstruction located several feet below the ground. So big piece of this project is this large infiltration basin. You can see a couple aerial photos to give you the sense of scale of this. We had initially planned for this to be located in this general area of the golf course, but ended up shifting it up into this corner to work better with overall playability of Columbia Golf Course. The basin was built last spring and summer. There are 2 storm sewer inlets, one that comes from the golf course and one that comes from storm sewer in the city area. We'd always planned to keep these 2 inlets offline for about a year to really give the basin a chance for the vegetation to establish. This is where a lot of the native plantings will be located. But we did construct the outlet to the city storm sewer system and realized during the spring snowmelt last year, there was a snowmelt and rain event that there actually was water backflowing through the outlet into the basin. We designed some additional erosion control because we had done some modeling and thought it would only happen in about a 10-year event. The construction season went on. The drought happening this summer actually helped for construction on a project like this. We didn't have a lot of erosion issues. But then on the flip side, once it started raining in late August and September, we realized that this pipe is actually black flowing in more frequent events. So we did have some washout into the basin. Also, the basin did fill up, and unfortunately, it's not draining within the time frame that we needed to drain in for the plants to stay established. So we are doing some additional exploration. We have a few ideas. I think the washout probably contributed to some of this. This pipe is now blocked off. We're also doing some additional review with our geotechnical engineer, and we're working as a group to come up with solutions for doing some potential rework of the basin in the spring to ensure that it functions as designed. Another really important component of this project is the habitat enhancement work, which has been a multi-step process. So in the winter of 2021, the first step was removing the invasive species in our restoration areas, which were mainly buckthorn, honeysuckle, and other woody invasive species. So these were cleared and gathered into brush piles, and the contractor did controlled burning because this is the most efficient and effective way to manage this type of debris, and then also reduces impacts to the area from heavy hauling equipment. So the top left picture is the brush burning that happened last year. And then the other 2 pictures are controlled burns that have been happening in the last few weeks. And these are to minimize the ground vegetation and basically do prep for the native planting seeding that will occur. The overall project included 19 acres that will be restored as woodland, oak savanna, and prairie habitats. Overall project benefits include removal of approximately 25 inhabited structures from the flood inundation areas in the 100-year event, and overall reduction of inundation time in the golf course from over 3 days to approximately 12 hours. The project is providing significant amount of water quality treatment for that over 800 acres shown earlier, and reducing that total sediment loading by about 37 tons per year and total phosphorus by about 170 pounds per year. And as just mentioned, it also included the 19 acres of native habitat restoration. I'm going to hand it back to Alicia, who's going to talk more through the management and communication of the project.
Thanks, Erin. All the project parts were brought to the MWMO board for approval and were set as not to exceed amounts. This included the 1NE watershed stormwater planning and preliminary design phase, the 30% design through construction documentation phase, and the actual agreement, which was with Minneapolis Construction, and they were the selected contractor for the project. SRF was also hired to provide bidding and construction support. And approved total dollars for this project were about $8.7 million, including contingency funds, which must be approved by MWMO staff before usage. The first part of the initiative, the 1NE planning, began back in May 2017. And as you can see with the pie chart, the bulk of the approved funds went towards construction at about 85%. Breaking it down in terms of the construction contributions only, partners include the MWMO, the City of Minneapolis, the Park Board, and grants. The Park Board does not have any official budget for the project based on Minger's original bid, but covered some Gulf-related costs as they came up during construction, such as cart path realignment. The MWMO and the city roughly split the costs, with the MWMO covering about $3.5 million and the city providing about $2.9 million. The project was also supported by an $800,000 Board of Water and Soil Resources grant and a $100,000 Hennepin County Opportunity Grant. In total, the bid amount was about $7.4 million. A good process for project administration has been key for making the project run smoothly. The general review process is that Minger Construction first submits their invoices and payment requests to SRF Consulting. SRF Consulting keeps a spreadsheet to track invoices per period and cumulative invoices and withholds 5% retainage. The MWMO, City, and Park Board then also track and review and note any discrepancies. The MWMO then approves and pays Minger invoices after any resolution, and the MWMO also invoices the City of Minneapolis and the Park Board when appropriate. To give you a sense of how this works, the funding and reimbursement cash flow, I have provided an overview of a recent invoice number 9. First, Minger Construction submitted a payment request for SRF Consulting for review. SRF Consulting retains the 5%, and the MWMO invoices the City of Minneapolis for the line items falling under their responsibility. Invoices to the City of Minneapolis factored in the retainage costs as well as the city's grant allocation, which equates to 14.7% of the city's cost, or about $426,000, which was met at the 5th invoice back in May 2021. For the 9th invoice, the city's responsibilities were relatively small, totaling about $2,600, and included the line items related to traffic control and erosion control, in which 50% of the responsibility was allocated to the city. The MWMO also invoiced the Park Board for about $50,000, which included a change order for additional bituminous removal and replacement requested by the Park Board, as well as golf cart path realignment. So far, there have been about 16 total change orders on the project, totaling about $418,000. Some of these have been relatively minor changes, while others have been quite significant, such as removing and disposing of contaminated material that was discovered during exploratory test pits at the multi-use basin at Columbia Park. Most of the costs are directly to do with the construction costs, but others are procedural. For example, there were updates to the contract dates due to the project getting started a little late while wrapping up partner agreements, and extra time needed to resolve challenges at the infiltration basin. One of the change orders also needed to clarify the retainage rate, and for all of the change orders, it's been very helpful to have detailed description of the issue and resolution, as well as additional attached changes to the design plans with clear markups so you can understand the project in the future. Under the stress of expensive change orders, the last thing anyone wants to have to do is start negotiating. The responsibility of each change order is not always black and white, but to minimize gray areas, we not only held many upfront discussions on how funding could be organized among all 3 partners, but we documented it as well in terms of the specific project goals to each partner organization. For example, in this project, the city was primarily interested in flood mitigation in upstream neighborhoods, while the MWMO was primarily interested in removing pollutants from the runoff before entering the Mississippi River, as well as ecological restoration. And the Park Board was primarily interested in improving golf course playability and aesthetics. Based on these primary goals, we actually spent time negotiating who was responsible for each and every line item in the bid documents, and we collectively reviewed this list each invoice cycle. Change orders or overruns could then, for the most part, be easily associated with each line item. If a change order could not be specifically associated with a particular line item, we would go back to the original primary goals set out at the beginning of the project and associate the change order accordingly. So if the change order is due, for example, due to contaminated soils and a water quality BMP, that would be covered by the MWMO. And if unstable soils require reinforcement to support a storm sewer main, the city would cover the change order costs. And if the park board wanted or needed any adjustment to drainage patterns along fairways, they would cover those costs. This project involved a large number of entities, but the main basic groups you can see are broken down into 3 hubs. The first is the 3 main government partners, the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, the City of Minneapolis, and the Park Board. The Park Board also coordinated with Norby Golf Course Design on the golf course related project elements. And even within one partner, such as the city, there are also a lot of sub-coordination, such as with traffic or surface water and sewers. The MWMO recently received funding from both Hennepin County and the Board of Water and Soil Resources for the project as well. And the MWMO hired SRF Consulting to oversee construction and assist with construction administration. Their sub-consultants on the project included Braun Intertech, Applied Ecological Services, and CNA Consulting Engineers, and the selected contractor for the project, Minger, also had subcontractors for the project. So lots of coordination among partners and with the public. Having a clear communications plan was critical. We worked with our communications principal to develop a plan with clear goals, key audiences, messages, and overall development and review protocol, and frequency and review for different types of communications, such as news releases, media, photography, project web pages, social media, and videos. We also established key contacts to be involved with review and development of content. And here you can see some examples of the types of communication used for the project. The site had several large banners that were printed and can be easily viewed by pedestrians and automobile traffic. Temporary signs designed by SRF Consulting were also used on site, describing the goals, purpose, partnership, and timeline of the project. Flyers were also sent to the neighborhood residents to share construction details and key information such as construction detours. Throughout the project, we have also maintained and updated our project web pages and coordinated on regular news releases for activities such as prescribed burning, so everyone stays in the loop. From the beginning, it was very important to clearly identify the roles and responsibilities for the project and think about how to best ensure long-term maintenance and function. Landbridge Ecological will maintain vegetation on site for 2 years beyond substantial completion, and the MWMO will hire a contractor for 2 additional years. This will be a training period for project partners. Partner roles and responsibilities were outlined in the construction cooperative agreement. The city is primarily responsible for the gray infrastructure, including maintaining the storm sewer infrastructure and vegetation below the 846-foot elevation for the multi-use basin and northwest infiltration basin. The park board is responsible for turf areas, golf, and all vegetated areas considered in play, and for the wet pond and vegetation above and below the normal water level, since the wet pond is primarily golf course drainage. Some of the lessons we've learned that will help streamline the future implementation of a multi-partner project like this one with multiple goals include upfront documentation of each organization's project's goals and technical objectives, both broad and detailed, thinking hard about the risks and benefits of either investing upfront in a lot of soil borings or setting aside sufficient contingency for those urban soil surprises, and then be prepared to spend that contingency. Setting up a communications plan prior to the start of construction with the communication professionals from each organization at the table, and allowing each partner to review any notices or email blasts before going out to the public. Start preparing a detailed and very comprehensive operation and maintenance plan early with multiple partners at play, but O&M responsibilities need to be very clear. And then finally, it's been very important to carefully maintain records to help with future understanding and any staff turnover associated with the project. Next steps for the project include troubleshooting and construction wrap-up for the multi-use basin and northwest infiltration basin, operation and maintenance plan review and initial implementation, vegetation monitoring and maintenance, and ongoing public communications, including developing site interpretation. And with that, I'd like to thank you for joining our presentation this morning and open it up for any questions you might have. Thank you.
Great job, ladies. I am looking at the chat right now and I don't see any questions that have popped up, but you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions as well. So we'll give it some time and see if anything comes up.
Hello, good morning. This is Maury. Quick question. How was the cost benefit analysis before the project started look like?
What was the cost benefit analysis? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
That was my question.
Yep. So we, I don't have those numbers directly in front of me. We did very high level on flood benefits for the city of Minneapolis. There were not specific cost benefit metrics associated with this project from the get-go. It's always been do the best that you can. And Alicia might have a little bit more details on that from the MWMO side, but from a planning and design perspective, we didn't have, we were just trying to reduce as many issues as we could from a flood perspective and then also improve water quality.
Yeah, I would also add our watershed is very urban, very built out, and Columbia Golf Course is one of the largest green areas in our watershed. And so this was also just a really big opportunity in terms of using that space available to design flood storage and water quality treatments. And also just the scale of ecological restoration and habitat creation is pretty significant for our watershed.
I'd also add that there were probably sort of little instances where we were looking at cost benefit along the way with design. We looked at a lot of components individually and what we could fit in there and what the best design was. And sometimes we did pick something a little more expensive because we did model these along the way. Certain items had better removals or did better for the flood control. And so it really came down to what the whole group was feeling about certain options.
Right. Thank you. And that takes me to my next question. Was this project a part of a big program or portfolio of projects, or it's just one by itself?
Well, this project was part of a larger watershed study, the One Northeast Initiative. And so with the Columbia Golf Course project, there are a lot of you could kind of think of them as sub-projects with all of the different BMPs, such as the pond expansion, the multi-use basin, Northwest Infiltration Basin, and then all of the different CDS units providing pre-treatment. And then, as also was discussed, the Hoyer Heights tree trenches project that's to the east of the golf course. So there's really a whole series of coordinated smaller projects within this sub-watershed of the MWMO.
And the city of Minneapolis has their stormwater utility, and they have funds specifically identified for flood mitigation. And so they actually, the Hoyer Heights Street Reconstruction Project and the 35th Avenue, that project were paid for by the city and led by the city. So those dollars are in addition to the over 7 million that have been spent in the golf course.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we have a couple more questions here. I'll start with Michael Welch.
Thanks, Maddie. Congratulations, you guys, on getting this project as far as you have. It's a very large project, as I'm sure I don't have to make you aware, and raises a bunch of questions for me, but I'm going to confine myself to 3 of them. I'm going to ask all together, then among the 3 of you, you can decide how to pick them up. One, I'm sure you looked at reuse as a BMP option and with a golf course right there, and wondering why, if that's something you're keeping in your back pocket for maybe adding later, because I did notice there was some future study area kind of out in the middle part of the golf course you didn't work on. Then second, there is a really interesting history in this neck of the woods with regard to a lake that used to be there that isn't there anymore. And I know that's a sore point for some of the longtime residents in that area, and how that factored into what you guys, how you made it through the process and developing the project. Then finally, I wonder if you had to deal with the railroad and how you got past that one, because they're never easy to deal with. And that's a huge rail bed that goes right through the middle of the golf course.
So I guess, Alicia, I can start. Is that okay?
Sure.
So the first two questions about reuse in Sandy Lake are kind of combined. So as we were going, or that my answer to that are kind of combined, as we were going through the planning and identified all those different projects, the south half of the golf course, I can get back to an image of that, is where Sandy Lake was located and where there are pretty significant flooding issues. And one offshoot basically down in here where these ponds are that used to be Sandy Lake. And this area though drains, well, drains isn't quite the right. There's a lift station down at the south end that basically pulls all the water from the south half of the golf course. So something that we realized early on is that that drainage area, there's almost a north and a south drainage area that comes to almost two different systems within the golf course. We realized early on that the south was significantly more complicated than the north area due to the lift station, potential groundwater interactions. Shoreham Yards is a big CP rail site, even to the south of the golf course, that has active groundwater and soil contamination mitigation project that's occurring. And so we decided to focus on projects within the north area of the golf course because they rose to the top as things that would provide benefits and could be done in that 3 to 5 year time frame. One offshoot is there was a study done on the south side of the golf course to do a water balance. And the outcome of that is we needed a little bit more data. So the MWMO and the park board have actually been collecting groundwater data and pump station data for the last several years within the golf course. And the goal is to look at that data again and determine the water balance. The park board currently has a groundwater pump that then drains water into this pond here, and that's what they use for irrigation water. Mm-hmm. So that is again in the south part of the golf course, but we didn't have a lot of data. So that's another key data point that we've been looking at. So I would say as the MWMO and the partners plan to study more into the south area, that reuse is probably a more likely component of that project. And then, does you have anything to add, Alicia?
No, I think that's a really great summary. As Erin mentioned, we're continuing to look at options for the south side of the golf course, but that's going to require quite a bit more study to get to the point of identifying what might be beneficial, if anything's beneficial, cost effectiveness, and what would be appropriate for the site. And I would think that the golf course's irrigations needs would certainly be a part of that conversation. I think you covered the first two questions really well with regards to the railroad coordination. That was with CP Railroad and did require a permit in order to have the storm sewer go underneath that rail bed. But I would have Erin or Lisa maybe talk about that further.
Yeah, CP does require a permit. They have pretty well-defined specifications and permit requirements for different types of utility crossings. And a lot of that depends on the size and the depth of what you're putting in. We were required to do one of the more detailed versions of that permit submittal. Probably the hardest part there is finding the right person at the railroad to talk to. We were lucky that the city had recently done a project with the railroad and was able to send us some contacts, and also their real estate professional who actually works in the Twin Cities was very helpful with putting us in contact with the right gentleman in Chicago who's actually in charge of processing and approving the utility crossing requests. I have reason to believe that this process is maybe getting better. They've changed some of their website and there might be a better way to get to their permit application. Really, it sounds like a daunting process. You have to give yourself a lot of time for them to respond. But in the end, what we submitted was actually pretty basic and generic. We were putting together really detailed plans for this project because there is so much going on. But what I wound up submitting to the railroad was a pretty basic map and sketch of a crossing and a profile and a small table of data and a couple of contacts and information like that.
And then
And you didn't have to have them ever close, stop service.
No, so the railroad is quite a bit above where we were working, so we were required to pay for flagging. In their crossing requirements and specifications, they're pretty specific about geotechnical and flagging needs. And so we were required to do some settlement monitoring, have a flagging crew out there while they were tunneling, but nothing needed to close because we're separated vertically enough.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is located in the chat box. This one is from Marcy, and she did ask how much legacy funds were used in this project and asking you to review the funding info slide.
I can cover this one. So the bulk of the funding for the project was split between the MWMO and the city of Minneapolis, but it was also supported by two different grants. And so the Board of Water and Soil Resources grant, that's the Clean Water Land and Legacy funding, and that's for $800,000. And there's also a $100,000 Hennepin County Opportunity Grant.
Okay, great. That's all I see in the chat box. Anybody else?
So this is Marcy again. The money that came out of the water management organization, was that general funds or benefit funds that came out of benefit areas? How did that get split up?
So that's capital funding comes through our levy. We have general levy funding that goes towards these types of projects, and our projects are generally identified in our watershed management plan. So all of those projects are listed there. And then we also do have a competitive grant program where sometimes our members apply for that funding each year, but most of the time it's in our watershed management plan already identified. And we are a watershed organization, so it's joint powers, and all of the projects that we do are approved by our board.
Thank you. And this is quite a project when you think about the technical coordination as well as the organizational coordination. So kudos to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, I think it's time for us to wrap up this session. Lots of compliments in the chat. Thank you all for attending today. The next session will start at 11 a.m. And if you are planning to attend a fundamentally new approach to lake management, you can actually just stay on this track. It's the same link. So we'll see you guys here at 11 o'clock. Thank you so much, Erin, Alicia, and Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for participating.